an Epicurean do if they were offered an upgrade to business class on a flight, for example? Is that something you should deny yourself, or would that bring you extra?
Well, I think this ties up with the point you raised earlier about celebrations and feasts. Epicureans regarded it as of the utmost importance to lead a simple life so as to have very few needs. But at the same time, a lot of the enjoyment of one's life for an Epicurean came from reliving past pleasures and looking forward to future ones. And that's why I think they were so keen that every so often there should be a special dinner, a special celebration, but not so often that any kind of dependence would arise. So I think that the free upgrade would be just fine, but not every time.
That does sound quite sensible, doesn't it?
It does make sense.
And I think, sorry, Tim.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think too, you wouldn't actively go out and ask for the free upgrade. If you, as an Epicurean, you would, if it came your way, it would be like, cool, okay, great. But you wouldn't go up to the counter when you were checking in and say, oh, is there any chance of an upgrade, kind of thing.
Exactly, yes.
Well, back to the history of Epicureanism, it had its critics, of course, we've been talking about that, but perhaps most famous is the arguments with the rival philosophical school of Stoicism. So Catherine, can you just encapsulate for us, how did these two philosophies differ?
Well, Stoicism really focuses on how you can kind of train your mind so that you're not bothered by reversals of fortune and misfortunes. You can get over even the death of friends, the death of children, by reminding yourself that these things are inevitable. They happen to people just because of the laws of nature. Things are fated from the beginning. And it's a kind of after-the-fact philosophy, although you prepare yourself by reminding yourself that you might be sent into exile, you might lose your fortune, bad things can happen to good people. But you do this purely by reminding yourself that you are an inner citadel, you are a walled fortress that nothing can break through unless you allow it to break through. And Epicureans are, I think, somewhat skeptical that you really do have the mental power to completely resist being bothered by adverse circumstances.
Well, the philosophy of Epicureanism began, as we've said, in Athens in the 3rd century BC, but then it did spread across the eastern Mediterranean and also to the Roman world over several hundred years. So what was its appeal, David? Why was it able to spread in this way?
I think it's partly because it was very easy to get started on. If you learnt that fourfold rule, you were already away, and no lessons in logic were required. So it was appealing that you could become part of an Epicurean community just with some very basic understanding of the system's principles, and that then you could learn together with your fellow members of the community.
Sonia, this was a very grassroots philosophy as opposed to being a top-down philosophy, right?
Yeah, and I think what we kind of mean by that is to say that they had a great teaching strategy. They really understood about how to introduce philosophy when you're first starting out versus the kind of complexity you're going to be able to understand as you progress through your philosophical life. And I think because of that, they seem, to me at least, to have understood that some people might only ever kind of get to a certain point with their understanding of Epicurean philosophy, and that was okay. They could still get something out of it that was useful to helping them live a happier life. And certainly when it came to Italy, one of the criticisms that Cicero seems to make of it is that it was very appealing to the so-called, I guess maybe it was the not so elite Romans, and they were very effective at kind of getting on board people who maybe didn't have the power and clout of someone like Cicero. And Cicero, being a little bit of a snob, didn't really think that was a great approach for a philosophical school.
Well, in the Roman world, Epicureanism eventually fizzled out around the 2nd century AD, and virtually nothing was heard about it for several hundred years. But if we move on to the European Renaissance, part of the revival was due, David, to the discovery of the manuscript by Lucretius, right?
That's correct, yes. In 1417, the papal secretary, Poggio Bracciolini, searching in monasteries in Germany, came across a copy of Lucretius' poem. And it was Poggio's discovery of this particular manuscript that eventually was made available for copying, that really kick-started the Epicurean revival in the early Renaissance. But it did take Latin translations of Greek works pretty soon after Poggio's discovery that enabled Epicureanism, particularly Epicurean physics, really to get started.
Let's hear an extract now from that work, De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, by Lucretius.
There is another fact that I want you to grasp. When the atoms are travelling straight down through empty space by their own weight, at quite indeterminate times and places, they swerve ever so little from their course, just so much that you can call it a change of direction. If it were not for this swerve, everything would fall downwards like raindrops through the abyss of space. No collision would take place, and no impact of atom upon atom would be created. Thus, nature would never have created anything.
From On the Nature of Things by Lucretius. You can certainly see with the emergence of modern science how these ideas would have struck a chord. And Catherine, you believe that the advances which led to the invention of the microscope in particular helped revive interest in Epicurean philosophy and its theory of atomism.
That's right. So beginning in the Renaissance, thanks to the invention of printing, there's enormous interest in chemistry and human anatomy. Books begin to be published and lots of readers are interested. And atomism seemed really promising and attractive because it implied that the difference between, say, lead and gold was just the way the particles making up those substances were arranged. And the difference between the sick body and the healthy body must come down to some physical difference. So if we could just see these tiny particles and tiny structures and figure out how to rearrange the atomic structures, we could transmute lead into gold. No more dangerous voyages, no more conquests, no more shipwrecks, and we could invent new medicines. Microscope was invented around the beginning of the 17th century, and people hoped that they would be able to see and so eventually to manipulate the atoms. This didn't pan out. There was a lot of disappointment that's recorded in various philosophical texts about impossibility of seeing the atoms. But now, of course, we can not exactly see, but we can visualize individual atoms. And there is a direct continuity from Epicurus right through to modern physics, where the theory of atoms is concerned.
David, when you think about how relevant some of these Epicurean ideas are for the development of modern science, it does seem a bit surprising that in popular notions of ancient philosophy, probably most people think about Epicurean thought and link it to the idea of hedonism, rather than thinking about these scientific elements. Why do you think that is?
Well, it may be because the ethical questions surrounding hedonism are of much more contemporary interest, whereas Epicurean physics belongs more to the history of science rather than being a part of present-day science. Even so, I would qualify that because, well, think of it this way, there were four major schools of philosophy in antiquity: Platonism, Aristotelianism, Stoicism, and Epicureanism. And in the 2nd century AD, Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, even set up chairs in Athens of these four philosophers. That's how canonical they were. Now, ask how far have these survived? Well, in many ways, Aristotelianism is still dominates many facets of the way we think. But as regards the nature of the world, I would say that Epicurus is the only one of those philosophers who could say modern science has actually confirmed and strengthened his position. I don't mean that the debates are now settled between theism and atheism or anything of the kind, but the arrival of Darwinism, the arrival of Newtonian physics, the arrival of quantum physics, every one of these, Epicurus would be in a position to say, has actually strengthened his hand. He would welcome those developments. He would gladly abandon his former physical views, because the moral lesson that we can, if we wish, conceive of the world as independent of a controlling deity has been strengthened.
Sonia, bring us bang up to date. You've taught ancient Greek philosophy to school children and to undergraduate students. What do they think about Epicurus?
So when they're presented with it in the context of sort of learning about all the other schools, at the end of a semester or a unit, I'll always say, oh, is there any particular school that you found particularly appealing? And the frequency of students saying, oh, Epicureanism is always interesting to me, and I always say, why? What is it about Epicureanism that's so appealing? And they seem to see it as a foil to kind of materialism, like the material world that they live in. And I think for a lot of students who, the last 10, 15 years, they've seen their parents go through sort of financial crises because of perceived, issues to do with banks and so on. So I think that they find that really appealing, this idea that you don't have to have a lot to be happy, and that you don't really need to get too stressed and anxious about trying to achieve power and money and status. Is appealing to younger students.
So, Catherine, do you think we can live like an Epicurean today?
Well, I think it would be great if everybody lived like an Epicurean today, and that world would look very different from the world we currently inhabit. There wouldn't be any wars for economic gain or ideology. We wouldn't have autocratic leaders who brutalize the population. Nobody would be trying to amass great quantities of wealth. We'd accept scientific results and act on them. And people would choose their friends and their partners on the basis of pure liking rather than practical considerations. They'd be open-minded about the natural and social world, and they'd enjoy food and drink and gardens and conversations and learning new things. And I think there's special resonance with a lot of our ecological and environmental concerns today, because Epicureans emphasize living with less, making do with less, looking for the simple pleasures that you find in the natural world and books and conversations with other people, none of which require great outlays of wealth. So I think as we begin to scale back some of our ambitions and expectations about growth and domination, Epicureanism will seem a more and more appropriate and sympathetic philosophy.
Well, thank you all so much for discussing Epicurus with me. Getting around the table, talking philosophy, it's probably exactly the sort of thing he would have approved of. My guests, Sonia Worster, Catherine Wilson and David Sedley. I'm Bridget Kendall, and thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm David Edmonds of the BBC World Service, and this is The Big Idea. I've found the most fascinating ideas around and the people who thought them up, and I'm going to do my best to explain them. My tube journey into work was delayed today. The bus journey takes over an hour, and tonight I'm trekking right across to the other side of town to see a friend. I love this place, London, my home, but it also infuriates me. If only there was a recipe for a well-functioning city. Well, Alex, everyone calls him Sandy Pentland, thinks there is. He's a number cruncher and the 21st century pioneer of something called social physics.
Well, social physics is actually quite old. Back when natural science was turning into physics and alchemy was turning into chemistry, there was this idea of being able to understand society using statistics and data. And the idea arose in France and in Britain, and in fact it's why we have a census and a national statistical office in most countries. But the problem has always been is that there's really not that much data. You have to do it with surveys and stuff. Very expensive. For instance, most countries have a national census only once a decade or something like that. Today, however, we have data from everything, from credit cards, from cell phones, from transportation systems. And so we can actually sort of run a digital census daily if you want.
This is all part of what's now called big data, the data revolution. Huge quantities of facts and stats, almost free to gather. Mining all that data, electronic ticketing on bus, trains and taxis, mobile phone flows, credit card payments, we're able to take the pulse of a city.
Well, thank you all so much for discussing Epicurus with me.
Putting all this data together doesn't tell you anything about a particular individual, but it does tell you about the city as an organism.
So you can look at a neighborhood and say, is this pattern of interaction typical of a healthy neighborhood or a neighborhood that's in a lot of problems? And you can ask things like, is this neighborhood something where the people know each other, where they interact, or is this a neighborhood where everybody's sort of scared and at home for one reason or another? Does this neighborhood interact with the rest of society, or is it something of a ghetto?
Tonight I'm tracking right across to the other side of town to see a friend. We want to know how neighbourhoods interact, because people affect each other's behaviour in surprising ways. If only there was a recipe for a well-functioning city. In one experiment, Sandy Pentland gave everyone in a university hall of residence a smartphone, and then, with their permission, tracked their activities.
We looked at what sorts of things influence their voting behavior, what sort of things influence their weight gain and health. And what we found in each case is that the social relationships were at least as powerful as anything else. And the funny thing is, it's not the ones that you're conscious of. It's your environment. So if we looked at the friends of a particular person, the ones they called friends, those weren't terribly predictive of your voting behavior or your weight gain. But the people you hung out with, which you didn't necessarily know, it's just the people that you shared space with, those were extremely predictive. So if you hang out in a place where everybody takes the third slice of pizza, you're likely to take the third slice of pizza. If you hang out in a place that's all very conservative, you're likely to become more conservative, whether you're aware of it or not.
Want to lose weight? Want to say no to that third slice of pizza with extra pepperoni? Then stay away from areas where obesity is common. Of course, the internet is creating echo chambers. Online, we tend to interact with people like us. The elites end up talking to the elites. That's one reason why they were so taken by surprise by the UK vote to leave the EU, Brexit, and the election of Donald Trump. But, says Pentland, the real echo chambers are not caused by social media.
The interesting thing, though, is it's the physical environment that still dominates. Online is not the major thing. It's who you actually physically hang out with. To that end, it's the fact that cities have become more and more polarized by wealth. The poor people live on the edge, the rich people live in the center. That is underlying a lot of this polarization.
In London, the centre of town has become unaffordable for many. Bad news for politics, which becomes more divided. The well-off lose touch with the problems and aspirations of those less fortunate. But bad news too for the economy. It means cities like London becoming less diverse will eventually suffer. The more diverse a city, the more people move around from one part to another, the wealthier that city is likely to be. According to Sandy Pentland, this seems to be something close to an urban law.
We have data from many parts of the world, from China, Southeast Asia, Africa, Europe, US. And in every case, what you find is you find the diversity of social relationships that a community has is extremely predictive as well.
So how does that work? Why does segregation so often mean poverty? Why do areas that become socially cut off from other parts of town experience a spike in crime? Why does a well-connected city become richer?
Access to new ideas, new opportunities is what drives the long-term creation of wealth called weak ties. And that's really what we're talking about, is if your neighborhood has very little access to what's going on in the rest of the world, how are you going to come up with new ways to make money or improve your lot? You have to invent it yourself, which is hard work.
So the claim is the central driver to the increase in wealth is ideas transmission, the fact that you're getting ideas from a mixture of different communities.
That's right.
Integration means innovation. Ghettos mean suffocation. A successful city will have an efficient transport network, allowing residents to move rapidly from one part of town to another. What about the perfect population size? Sandy Pentland suggests this is about 1.5 million, of which half might be adults. Suppose each person knows 150 people well. Then, each person will be able to access around 22,000 people who are either friends or friends of friends. That's 150 times 150. And with one more hop through these 22,000 people, there should be several ways of reaching every other adult in the city.
The places that are best governed, the places that have the highest rate of innovation, tend to be places where everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. There's not just one link. It's not like everybody knows each other, but they know how to get in touch with people. They can be introduced to people. Also, there's a higher level of trust because you won't do something nasty to somebody because they know people you know, and that wouldn't be seen very well. So there tends to be a little bit more good dealing between people up to a certain size.
The soundscape of a city. Can I have a decaf medium mocha with extra cream, please, to take away? Thank you. So here are the ingredients to making a city work. Fluid, open neighbourhoods with mixed social housing, connected by excellent transport links and filled with coffee shops, parks, gyms, restaurants and other places in which you can bump into fellow citizens. That's the recipe for success. And it sounds like my kind of town. Thanks a lot for listening to The Big Idea on the BBC World Service with me, David Edmonds. Details of more big ideas you need to know can be found at bbcworldservice.com.
This is the BBC World Service, where Linda Presley brings us the second in a new series.
I always felt uncomfortable with my body. As a kid, I wanted to be a boy.
This is Naila, born female. She lived as a trans man. And this is her partner, Ellie.
I was so shy to tell anyone that I was trans.
Naila and Ellie are both detransitioners. We're exploring how and why some trans people are returning to their assigned birth gender.
Detransitioners at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries. Coming up on Sports World with me, Sarah Mulcairns. Should Premier League footballers take a pay cut? As 5 of the clubs say they will use the government scheme in the UK to help pay most of the wages of their non-playing staff. Are the players doing their bit? That's what we will be discussing in Sports World. On air, online and on mobile, this is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Big ideas you need to know can be found at bbcworldservice.com.
This is Sports World on the BBC World Service.
Coming up on the show with me, Sarah Mulcairns. Should Premier League footballers take a pay cut?
I just hope people aren't sat at home thinking that we don't want to contribute, because that is really not the case. And conversations have been had way before, people were speaking about this.
Newcastle's Danny Rose says he wants to help, but how far away are we from the Premier League clubs announcing a reduction in players' salaries? Plus, the England netballer back from Australia and working as a doctor.
When I saw NHS hospitals were recalling retired doctors and nurses and 4,500 people signed up, I just felt like I had a real duty and I wanted to be at home working.
That was Leila Guscott. We will also talk Women's Euros potentially in 2022. That's all on Sports World in 5 minutes' time.
Hello, I'm David Harper with the BBC News. Within the next half hour, hundreds of millions of people across India are expected to show solidarity in the fight against the coronavirus by turning off all their lights. The gesture of unity was called for by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, but the appeal has been described as a dangerous gimmick. Divya Arya reports from Delhi.
Indian citizens have been urged to switch off their lights tonight at 9 p.m. local time for 9 minutes and come out in their balconies to light oil lamps, mobiles or torches. Prime Minister Modi said this was to show the collective superpower of 1.3 billion people. But experts have voiced concerns about the risk of sudden power fluctuations leading to massive outages, prompting the Ministry of Power to issue a clarification about arrangements being put in place to handle the instability the 9 minutes could cause.
The number of coronavirus deaths in Spain is continuing a downward trend. The latest daily figures from the world's second worst affected country in terms of mortality show 674 deaths, another drop after a week of fatalities above the 800 mark. The total now stands at more than 12,400, but there was a 5% increase day on day in admissions to intensive care. Residents in several parts of northern Italy have been told that from today they'll have to wear face masks if they leave their homes. Jean Mackenzie reports from Rome.
It's now compulsory for people leaving their home to wear a face mask in certain parts of Italy. The order covers the regions in the north that have been hardest hit by the virus, including Lombardy. This stricter measure comes at a critical time for Italy. The rate of infection has slowed here over the past week, and the number of daily deaths is down.
Police in Britain have issued a warning to Scotland's chief medical officer for twice visiting her family's second home, ignoring her own coronavirus advice to avoid travel. Police said they visited Catherine Calderwood to speak to her about her conduct. Dr. Calderwood has since made an apology live on television.
People have told me that I'm irresponsible, that I've behaved as if my advice does not apply to me. I want people to know that I have seen all of that, and I've heard the comment. What I did was wrong. I'm very sorry. It will not happen again. I know how important the advice is that I've issued. I do not want my mistake to distract from that.
The number of people in Britain who have died after testing positive for the coronavirus has risen by 621, slightly down on the previous day. The total since the start of the outbreak now stands at nearly 5,000. Figures suggest the surges in cases may be slowing down. Earlier, the Health Secretary for England warned that the government may ban outdoor exercise and continue to ignore the rules. You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC. The health authorities in Bahrain have introduced electronic tags to monitor quarantined and self-isolating COVID-19 cases. The gadget is linked to a smartphone using an app which monitors the person's location and vital signs. If a patient moves more than 15 metres away from their smartphone, a message is sent to the authorities. The president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, has announced that what he called low-risk economic activities will resume from next Saturday. In a televised meeting, he said 2/3 of all Iranian government employees would start carrying out their duties from home. The president said the decision did not contradict official coronavirus guidance.
Decisions were made today in regards to business and the economy. From April 11th, the country's medium-sized and low-risk businesses can resume their activity, but high-risk businesses remain banned until the end of April, with the decision to be made at a later date.
The Iranian Health Ministry says 3,400 people have died of the coronavirus so far, with nearly 56,000 confirmed cases. Many analysts say the official figure may be an underestimate. The South African government says it has identified a private hospital in Durban as a hotspot for coronavirus infection. It wants anyone who has been a patient at the city's St Augustine's Hospital since the beginning of March to contact the local health authority. South Africa is the worst hit country on the continent, with more than 1,500 cases. A South African couple on honeymoon have been left stranded on an island in the Maldives after the coronavirus outbreak prevented them from returning home. Olivia and Raoul de Freitas are one of the only guests remaining at their 5-star island resort. Ms. de Freitas told the New York Times everyone thought they wanted to be stuck on a tropical island until it actually happened. Live from London, you're listening to the latest BBC News.
on radio, online and on mobile. This is Sports World on the BBC World Service.
Hello, and you're very welcome along to Sports World with me, Sarah Mulcairns, this Sunday, here with you for the next hour. I know we have been coming into your homes every week for how many years now, so it is lovely in these very strange times to be able to welcome you all into my home virtually from a safe distance. I'm broadcasting from the front room today with our team back at base in the studios, making it all happen very safely for you. Do remember that for all the latest news, you can keep connected to the BBC World Service. The next news here is at the bottom of this hour, so we will keep you right up to date with any developments. And in this first half hour of the programme this Sunday, we're going to talk about the business of football and player payments in this coronavirus pandemic, because all this week here in the UK, the spotlight has been very firmly trained on the sport and how it is acting. We had the news earlier this week that the Premier League were going to ask players to take a 30% pay cut in order to protect jobs. Then in the last 24 hours or so, the Professional Footballers Association, that is the union for players here, said that that reduction would be detrimental to the health service here because of the tax that would go from that to the government. And then away from the playing staff, we have also had this issue of furloughing, a word that we're all becoming familiar with, because we saw that Liverpool were the 5th club this week to put some of their non-playing staff onto this government system, which is essentially the government would pay 80% of a person's wages up to a certain amount. And to make sense of it all, the unenviable task, I'm delighted to say that our guests are the BBC's senior football reporter Ian Dennis and the former England and Chelsea goalkeeper Rob Green. Hello to you both.
Hello, Sarah, how are you?
Hi, lovely to have you with us. You both safe and well?
Yes.
Yep, locked away in my bedroom now, thank you. So, yeah, all good. Dano, are you hiding the sound? I'm playing hide and seek with the kids. They just don't know it. Yeah.
I'm playing hide and seek from the wife.
Are you doing it with the duvet over your? Because you know, with the soundproofing, we've all suddenly become experts. Have you got the duvet over your head, Rob?
Something like that. I've wrapped myself up in the airing cupboard. They haven't found me for 2 weeks now.
Okay, well, all that kind of stuff aside, I'm sorry to bring the tone down and deal with this subject that we have all been grappling with, I think, this week, Ian. And there is the business of football, and then there is what it looks like from the outside. And I think that's what has been the biggest issue this week. Just tell us where we are with the conversations and the conferences that we've been having this week with all the footballer stakeholders here in the UK.
Well, the latest one was following yesterday, because there was a conference call yesterday involving the Premier League, the PFA and the LMA to discuss the various wage cut plans, and this follows the announcement on Friday where the Premier League advanced £125 million, and it is an advance, to the clubs in the EFL and the National League, and also the Premier League pledged £20 million to the NHS. But what the PFA did yesterday is that they basically have now come out with a statement saying that the proposals for a 30% pay cut would be detrimental to the NHS in the UK, and the union argues that should there be a cut, that would equate to more than £500 million in wages, the reductions over a 12-month period, and they would result in a loss in tax contributions of more than £200 million to the UK government. And I can't help but feel, Sarah, that it's become very, very messy now over the last few days. And if you pardon the pun, it's become a political football, and the players are the ones who are under scrutiny. But they are under scrutiny only through the actions of some club owners, because you've got Liverpool, Newcastle, Tottenham, Bournemouth and Norwich who have placed non-playing staff on this furlough leave under the government job retention scheme regarding the coronavirus. So the players are under scrutiny through the actions of some club owners and the words of government ministers. And as a result of that, now you've got factions that are appearing throughout the various football authorities, because the PFA have also said that they want the Premier League to put a greater donation of £20 million. They believe that figure should be even bigger to the NHS. And so all of a sudden you've got a war of words between a lot of people at this stage.
Rob, how has it felt looking on this last week at how this is all playing out as a former player?
Yeah, I think as players, not a lot. Some will be politically interested, not a lot will. A lot of the players, you forget, are international from abroad, so won't even understand our political system, won't even understand the tax system. And they will look at their wage slip every month and see an amount removed and know it's, but they don't know what it's for and they don't know why, because every country's different. So it's you know, you look at it and it's seemingly a knee-jerk reaction in a press conference by Matt Hancock, which is kind of snowballed, as Ian has kind of said. It's kind of a bit of gaslighting by him to say, yeah, we've not really prepared properly for this, but hey, footballers should be paying more money, anything to take the headlines off us. And as you're saying, it snowballed, and it's kind of sad that it's come to this situation where the players, through no fault of their own, are now having to turn around and go, right, okay, individually, a lot of them have done stuff. You look at Marcus Rashford, who's donated a lot towards school meals at the time, and when schools were in school up until Easter holidays. And so there's various reactions from individuals themselves, but as a group effort, it's a knee-jerk reaction off one guy's press conference answer from the Premier League that has snowballed as such, and it's going to end up with the players having to come across, you know, 20 clubs, 25, 30, 40 players within each team to agree this, and it's going to take time. And so, you know, it happens time and again, and I go back to the times when I was to go on strike a number of years ago and got lambasted by the media, by society, and the players were looking after the lowest paid players, the players in League One, the players in League Two at the time. They were looking after those guys to say, no, we're using our power. And again, it's come down to this, that it's people shirking responsibility and trying to throw it onto someone else. And, you know, and as Wayne Rooney said today, it's ended up with the players being the scapegoats through no fault of their own.
Yeah, Ian, that is something that has come out. Wayne Rooney has written an article in the Sunday Times here today. We know also that Danny Rose of Newcastle has been vocal on the BBC about it in terms of it's a no-win situation. In terms of this actual, when we look at the specifics of it from a player's payments point of view, there's a couple of different things happening around the world, be it a wage cut. In Barcelona, that money is going towards the non-playing staff to help them, whether it's a deferral. Do we know here in the UK in this Premier League wage cut whether that will be going to help the Premier League clubs themselves keep going financially, or where that money would go?
Well, it would. Not at this stage, although judging by that PFA statement, I think that is the point, that what needs to happen is that I think the fact that it's the non-playing staff who've been put on this furlough leave, and for those who haven't come across that before, this is where an employee is placed on a leave of absence by your employer, and you're not paid, although you remain on the payroll. And throughout the coronavirus, the UK government basically said that for 3 months they would offer to pay 80% up to £2,500 a month. And as a result of that, you had these Premier League clubs who were awash with money at the top end, paying millions of pounds to their top players, and yet it's the non-playing staff who are the one who's been put on furlough leave. And Tottenham, Newcastle, Bournemouth, Norwich and Liverpool are the latest ones to do so. And I think it's the fact that it's the non-playing staff who were put on this furlough leave, I think that angered a lot of people, because had they put the players or said to the players first, can you take the wage cuts, and then we might do that. They've got it the wrong way around. Football has scored an own goal. But I do agree with Rob, and I would agree with the point made by Wayne Rooney as well, that the footballers themselves are scapegoats, because Rob mentioned Marcus Rashford and the significant funds that he's done to Fair Share, which helps out with children's meals. Football United is another one that has been raised of late, where they're looking to try and raise a certain amount of money. It involves Aaron Wan-Bissaka, I seem to recall. I think Reece James of Chelsea's involved. And of course you've got Common Goal as well. Juan Mata, Jurgen Klopp, Leon Balogun, who I know you've had on the World Service before, the Brighton and Nigerian international. He's part of that scheme as well. Duncan Watmore, Kasper Schmeichel. That's where you give a percentage of your salaries to football charities. So there is a lot of work that footballers will do off their own back without being forced into doing it. And when Rob talked before about Matt Hancock on Thursday, when he said the government stance, and he said he publicly criticised footballers' salaries, and now all of a sudden you've got the Secretary of the Departure of Culture, Media and Sport, Oliver Dowden, saying that the government is concerned by what it's called as infighting. All of that stems from Matt Hancock's comments on Thursday. You know, the footballers themselves would come to do something, I'm sure. In fact, Danny Rose mentioned on 5 Live on Friday night that this had started through Jordan Henderson long before the comments of Matt Hancock on Thursday. But as Rob said, and Rob will know because he's been in that dressing room, sometimes it's not easy to get a collective gathering.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about this is that, you know, the Premier League have come up with this figure, and then they have to go to the PFA and the agents, and they all have to agree with it. And Rob, you wonder, when you do look at the discrepancy in player wages in football, whether this is something that perhaps footballers and clubs could negotiate themselves on a case-by-case basis, because surely some footballers would be able to give more and some would be able to give less.
Absolutely, yeah. And you look at it, and you look at some guys who, for want of a club, a first-year professional at Burnley will not be getting paid anywhere in the same regards as Jordan Henderson, using the name that we've just pulled out there. Then, but it's kind of. It is, and all this leads to it taking more time. Now, as Danny Rose was saying, these wheels were in motion. You know, the Premier League and stuff like that. We had discussions last season when I was at Chelsea with the Premier League about young players deferring their payment, making payments automatically into a savings account for themselves, just because they were getting paid so much. And the amount that had to be agreed took so much time, because the time of players, ironically now they have time on their hands, but the time of players is so concentrated that it takes all this time. And like you're saying, it's people all over the country, all over the world, having to agree these figures. And these discrepancies and the amount, and it's everybody. And some people will be willing to pay more than others, and some people won't understand why they need to pay so much out of their own wage, and it will need explaining to them. So it's a lot of conversations that need to be had. And the upsetting thing is, like we said before, as Dano was saying then, is that it feels, whilst the players do take responsibility and do a lot of work behind the scenes, which they do not get very little praise for, they have been forced into this situation where they are now scrambling around to try and come up with answers. And it's a difficult one because, as we said before, there is a no-win. It's never going to be enough. And in the public's eyes, it only gets heightened by people like MPs coming out and criticising them.
Matt Hancock, just if people don't know around the world, is the Minister for Health here in the UK, who made those comments initially. Ian, I just kind of want to talk about the business of football, because a lot of people will look at football and just see all the big numbers, you know, bandied around every week, be it player wages, TV rights, the whole lot, and kind of struggle to see, okay, well, why are these football clubs having to put their non-playing staff on these government schemes? Surely they have millions and millions in their coffers. Can we just talk about where the money from football comes from and the reliance on the TV money? Because this seems to be a really big pinch point at the moment with football clubs.
It is the whole money, the success of the Premier League, and it is a global product now, and obviously when World Service join our commentaries on a Saturday afternoon, they will know that appeal, and having been in in places such as South Africa and Ghana in the past. I know I've seen it firsthand how big the Premier League is, and certainly in Nigeria as well. So we know how the appeal is as far as the Premier League is far-reaching, but it's all underpinned by money, and it all comes down to the TV deal. And if this coronavirus, if football is not able to return, there is an argument that the broadcasters might well demand £762 million back. That would be the financial penalty. That would basically bankrupt football. So this is a real problem, that the whole game is underpinned by the TV money. And it's a money waterfall that not only just reaches the Premier League, but it cascades all the way down to the Football League and the National League. You've seen that with the Premier League advancing that £125 million on Friday. And there is a real concern that if we're not able to get back to playing football, then the clubs will not be able to pay that money back, because I can bet you bottom dollar that that final instalment, that would have already been used to go on players' wages. So it is quite worrying, the ramifications of this coronavirus if football is not able to return.
Sarah, I think on top of it, the clubs will have small contingencies at times, but the size of this and the problems that they're facing now is so huge, as Dano was saying, that it is beyond anybody's comprehension. 6-12 months ago, clubs at times come into financial difficulties. At times, like you look at Bury this season, once a decade or so, a club will go out of business from the Football League, and it's a catastrophe when it does. But to bring the whole game down is something that is huge, and I think it's just, again, we're talking about knee-jerk reactions, but it's the panic from clubs to turn around and go, what can we do? Because they're now looking at ways, and it's always the non-playing staff, and it's such a shame, because that's the heartbeat of the club, that's the soul of the club that keeps things going. And players come and go, but at the time you can replace those people. Unfortunately, you can't replace the players, and it's always the first people to go. And so it's a real shame at the moment, and it's something that I'm sure the clubs wouldn't have wanted to do. And you're looking at it saying, with all the figures that are banded around, but they run such fine margins. We're talking about the airline companies running at 2% profit per flight or whatever it was. And, this bump in the road was causing a lot of people a lot of headaches. The football clubs, it's, even finer, even, a lot of the times they'll be planning to run into debt every season, and they just cannot comprehend something this big.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Rob, that you mentioned that about the fine margins that the clubs run on, because we know in the last hour or so we've got the news that Manchester City won't be putting their non-playing staff on the furlough scheme, that they will be, continuing to pay it, but their owners have very deep pockets. But then you look at the likes of Burnley, and they say if the season doesn't finish, they could be facing a bill of up to 50 million. And while people might be looking on, these are complicated matters as to where the money comes from. And although football always has big figures in it, it's, I suppose, the business of actually running it and how much is actually there in the cash flow. And that's what businesses around the world, regardless of what they're involved with, it's the cash flow at the moment that has stopped in every business.
Yeah, and you're looking at it and saying that some clubs is 60-70% of their turnover is gone in the wages of the players, and that's what the competition brings, that desperation to bring success to your team. They're looking at such a high percentage that they've got to carry on paying these wages, and so without the incomes and the threat of this lawsuit or potential breaching of contract, however may unforeseen it has been, is going to be so damaging, and it's a frightening thought, and one that you wonder, as Dano was saying, how it can bring itself back from, if structurally football's built itself on the money that the Premier League has provided for so long, that when it stops, what do you fall back on? And it's a difficult one to answer right now.
That TV deal, Sarah, was worth £5 billion. £5 billion over what? 3 years, from 2019 to 2022. So, and a lot of that, as Rob says, goes on wages. And for instance, Tottenham, in their figures up until June 2018, their wage bill was £148 million. I mean, this is why the TV deal it's the glue that holds English football together.
And that's the worrying part then, isn't it, when you look at the future and how we progress from here?
It's a real struggle. It's one that it's been created since the start of the Premier League, and you look at clubs and you look at them and say, well, with the argument has been over recent years when crowds maybe have fallen away a little bit in the Premier League and teams have struggled to drag them in. They're saying, well, actually, it's such a small percentage of what they're required upon. You look at someone like a club like Bournemouth, and their stadium it holds 12,000. They just cannot. It just doesn't stack up without that TV money, and this is something that no one could ever really foresee, that the TV deal would cave in on itself because there isn't the product there. Whether it's a overused product in the number of games that are shown, whether it's a subsidiary product because we can't attract the players from all around Europe, or whatever it might be. The arguments might be over last year. The number one thing we have been able to do is provide the games, and now we can't do that. It looks like it's got the potential to cave in on itself, which is why everyone is so desperate to finish the season off.
Yeah, Ian, do you think the season will have to finish now?
No, I think the fact that they've lifted the restriction of a blackout on Saturday 3 o'clock kickoffs for television, I think the plans are in place, even if it's behind closed doors, for the season to be concluded. Obviously, football in the UK at the minute is suspended indefinitely, and obviously a lot depends on the scale and the extent of the coronavirus. But I would envisage that games could be played behind closed doors as the next step in order to try and get the season concluded. And the fact that UEFA now are prepared for the various domestic competitions across Europe to go beyond June the 30th, I still think there is a degree of flexibility that is required, but there is also the goodwill and the desire from the various leagues still to try and conclude the various domestic competitions.
Okay, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. Rob Green from the cupboard upstairs. I hope you do get some freedom shortly from there. And Ian Dennis, thank you as always for charting our way through the very tricky times and the finances and how football operates between the cash flow coming in, where the money comes from, the player wages and the government schemes, all those issues that we have been talking about this week. I hope you've all learned a little bit more in this half hour. We will be back in the next half hour. We're going to talk a little bit about boxing and the women's Euros, whether they will go ahead in 2022, and also hear from a doctor fighting coronavirus.
This is the BBC World Service, where we're navigating the world through sound.
You can sense the contrast of a city as much by its sounds as by its sights. This is the archetypal Australian sound. They're just getting ready for the barbecue. Oh, that smells good.
Yep, I made it myself, I did.
Did you?
Yeah.
It's a very good city for a blind person. It's square. In the city itself, there's beautiful sounds like St Paul's Cathedral when the bells are ringing there, or our post office clock, which bangs away like Big Ben.
Exploring the Australian city, the cricket grounds, the seaside and the harbour.
And most of my weekends were spent right over there on the beach, just doing nothing. Sitting around, swimming, talking to girls. That's pretty much about it.
Sounds of the City, Tuesday at 12:30 and 21 GMT.
This is Sarah Mulcairns with Sports World. Still to come, we discuss the impact of moving the Women's European Football Championships from 2021 to 2022. This week, the Danish FA confirmed that the tournament will be rescheduled. It seems like the right decision, but what are the wider implications for the women's game? And we will hear from the England netballer who answered Britain's appeal for doctors to return to help the National Health Service. That is Sports World in 2 minutes.
BBC News with David Harper. Hundreds of millions of people across India are taking part in a collective act of solidarity in the fight against the coronavirus by turning off all their lights. The gesture of unity was called for by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Spain has fined more than 300,000 people for flouting coronavirus restrictions that began 3 weeks ago. The Interior Minister said police had carried out more than 3 million checks on vehicles and people. For the third day running, the number of new coronavirus deaths in Spain has fallen. Scotland's chief medical officer has apologised for travelling to her family's second home, despite advising all Scots to avoid travel to limit the spread of the coronavirus. Catherine Calderwood said she was truly sorry after Scottish media reported she'd made the hour-long journey twice. Morocco's King Mohammed VI has pardoned more than 5,600 prisoners and ordered their release in an effort to prevent the spread of coronavirus in the country's overcrowded jails. The Justice Ministry said inmates will be released in stages and were selected on the basis of age, health, time spent in jail and good conduct. A South African couple on honeymoon have been left stranded on an island in the Maldives after the coronavirus outbreak prevented them from returning home. Olivia and Raoul de Freitas are now the only guests remaining at their 5-star island resort in the Indian Ocean, and they're worried that they will be bankrupted if the lockdown in their home country continues for much longer. In other news, officials in Ukraine say a forest fire near the stricken Chernobyl nuclear power plant has been brought under control. The emergency service said no increased airborne radiation had been detected. It said there was no danger to people living near the 30-kilometre exclusion zone around the plant. Firefighters had earlier said they'd encountered difficulties due to higher radiation levels in some parts of the blaze. The plant's fourth reactor exploded in 1986. BBC News.
On radio, online and on mobile. This is Sports World on the BBC World Service.
And the next news is at 16 hours GMT, but you are very welcome back to Sports World with me, Sarah Mulcairns, bringing you the show from the front room of my house in Manchester today. Before we get to the second half of today's programme, a reminder that here at the BBC World Service, we want you to share your stories of how coronavirus is affecting you and your community. What challenges are you facing and how are you trying to cope?
I just felt immediately protected and safe, because they all, realise the importance of protecting people like me, and I am just so grateful.
Yeah, just record a voice memo. You can record up to 5 minutes just on your smartphone, and there is more information. You can find out where to send it. Just go to bbcworldservice.com/response. Now, next year's Women's European Championships is set to be moved to 2022. That was from the Danish Football Association and their revelations this week, with the Tokyo Olympics and the Men's Euros rescheduled for the summer of 2021. It was expected that the women's competition would be delayed by a year. Now, UEFA say no formal decision has been made, but postponement is a likely option. But a statement from the Danish FA this week says the tournament has been rescheduled for 2022. Well, qualifying for the Euros is less than halfway through its group stage, and the playoffs scheduled for June have already been postponed. I've been speaking to the Spain and OL Reign right back Celia Jimenez Delgado, who says it will be hard to wait another year to compete, but believes it is the right thing to do.
This is a difficult time that we're living. I think right now our main focus has to be on keeping everybody safe, or fans or staff, everybody, all elders, us players too. So it is sad news. We are obviously all excited to play soccer, but right now the main focus has to be in a bigger problem, in keeping everybody safe. So I think it's a little frustrating that we have to wait to do something that we love so much, but the priority has to be on health and world health, and just trying to save as many lives as we can right now.
If the Women's Euros was to go ahead next summer and you had the Men's Euros and you had the Olympics as well, is that possible at all?
I mean, that's going to be a lot of soccer. I think in the past years, and the last 3 or 4 years, women's soccer has been growing so much. We've been filling stadiums. We've been playing in front of thousands and thousands of fans. So definitely it would be a good environment to play. Just everybody will be really in touch and following soccer. But at the same time, I think like either if we wait to 2021 or if it gets pushed to 2022, women's soccer has already started. It has a really big impact, and I think it doesn't matter where we play because we're going to be excited, and our fans are definitely going to be excited to enjoy this beautiful sport too.
Do you think if it was in 2022, it would have more of a chance to have its own platform, its chance to really impact?
Yeah, maybe like the fact that there isn't so much going on is gonna allow the tournament to have more attention, but at the same time I believe that we are creating that community, that we have the support from our fans, and that they will find the way to support us even though there will be a lot of competitions going on.
And in terms of the Spanish national team at the moment, you've been in some really good form recently as a team collectively, with the World Cup last year, the She Believes Cup as well recently. Is it frustrating not to be able to try and build on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think like in the last couple of years, we've been doing things better every year, and we are achieving the results that we had in mind. We still have a long way to go, but it's sad that we don't get to keep working and keep seeing how we're developing in the next year or so. But like I said, I think right now the fact that like our fans remain safe, our staff, us players, and just like our community and our society, it's way bigger than anything.
Absolutely. And then if we had the Euros in 2020, or if we had the Olympics in 2021, potentially a Women's Euros in 2022, and then another World Cup in 2023, that's 3 pretty decent summers.
Absolutely. I think that would be a great scenario for fans. It will give them the opportunity to follow soccer, to enjoy this sport as much as we do. And maybe on the bright side and on a positive note, it will also keep us athletes fit and through really good years of competition. So I don't know. I think right now the most important thing is to remain positive, and regardless of what the final decision is, I'm sure that everybody, the fans and also the teams and the players, will make the best out of it and will provide a good environment and a good show.
Talk to me then about the domestic season, the NWSL. You mentioned that the pre-season was postponed and it was due to get underway the season proper in a couple of weeks' time. That's all been pushed back now. What sort of communication are you getting from the league?
So right now we are getting lots of information from the league, from the team, from the coaching staff. I pretty much receive like an email every 3 days, and things are changing a lot. I think the situation is evolving. The laws that get sent from the government also change every day, so it's really hard to have a clear picture. But I do have the confidence and I trust that we're doing everything that we can to try to stay safe, but also to do what we can based on the situation.
We've been talking a lot about male footballers and pay cuts and how the lack of games is affecting revenues coming into it. How big of a worry is this crisis on the viability of the women's game as well?
I think when you put money, when you compare money to humans' life, there is no question that human lives are way more important. So I think like money, yeah, sure, it's important and it allows us to do what we love, but it has nothing to do with humans' life. And right now, like I said, it's obviously our priority is to keep people healthy and to keep everybody in the best circumstances and conditions that we can.
That's brilliant, Celia. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you continue to stay safe and that your family remain well as well.
Thank you, you too.
Okay, to boxing now, because Anthony Joshua will have to wait longer to defend his IBF, WBA, WBO and IBO World Heavyweight titles after his fight with Kubrat Pulev was postponed this week. The bout was due to take place at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in June, but a new date is now being worked on. So let's speak to our boxing reporter, Adi Adedoyan now. Adi, it's hard to speculate about when this may take place, but is there any sort of rough guidance when a new date may be held for this?
Well, it was interesting that Pulev, a week before the fight was postponed, said he didn't expect it to go through in June as scheduled, and he suggested that at the end of the year is more realistic. I suppose the problem that Eddie Hearn, who promotes Anthony Joshua, faces at the moment is that football is suspended indefinitely, so you don't know when Tottenham are going to have to play their home games at their ground, which is where he wants to stage the fight. So he's going to have to potentially find a new venue, find a new date. With so many fights being cancelled at the moment, you're going to be scrambling for dates and venues when the restrictions are lifted. But realistically, it's looking like it's going to be at the end of the year at some point.
And we know, when you mentioned some other fights being cancelled or postponed, we know that the Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury one has been postponed. So now we're going to have to wait even longer for that much anticipated contest between Fury and Joshua.
Yeah, Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury were due to meet for the trilogy fight in July, but that got postponed because of the global pandemic. Again, that's looking like it's going to happen at the end of the year, which then knocks back a potential showdown between the winner, which many expect to be Tyson Fury again, facing Anthony Joshua to perhaps next year. The only way that that fight could happen this year is if the promoters of Fury and Joshua get together and offer Deontay Wilder and Kubrat Pulev some step-aside money. It happens in boxing. You can give them, I know, $2 million to say, we'll get this fight done, and then you face the winner. It happens, and it's been done in past. It's been done before in the past. It's whether Deontay Wilder would want to wait potentially for another 6 or 7 months once the restrictions are lifted before getting back in the ring. That's the main issue. But realistically, it's looking like Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, if they win their respective bouts, won't be meeting until next year at some point.
And Adi, when we talk about, lead-in into different bouts, a lot is made of the time in training camp and how that all works and the amount of weeks that they have. How is this all affecting these fighters now?
It must be very difficult because you train to peak on a certain day. Take, for example, Dillian Whyte, who is the WBC's interim champion. He was due to fight on the 2nd of May in Manchester. He's in Portugal at the moment, training for that fight. It got moved now, it got postponed because of the pandemic, and the new date is July. I spoke to him a few days ago, and he said the difficulty is